Have you ever had a why question in your life? Something that you wanted God to answer. Why is this happening? Why did that happening? Why isn't something happening? Or perhaps a corollary. I'm looking at events and I'm looking at the data points in my life and none of it's making sense. I remember when we were at the end of our corporate journey around the year 2000, we were out in San Diego, California. We had just sold the company that we had done a turnaround to a pharmaceutical company. I had to stay on for 2 years in the management transition there. And at the end of that 2-year period of time, it was getting close to the end. My wife and I were out in our backyard in the hot tub that evening, which, by the way, when you live in San Diego, that's what you do. You're in the hot tub in the evening. And we were reflecting on our 32-year journey through corporate America. 5 different jobs, 5 different cities, 5 different businesses and industries. And from a professional development point of view, none of that made any sense whatsoever. I couldn't connect the dots on how one built on the other and prepared for the other. It just sort of seemed random. And then we were given an insight that just took our breath away. Because we were shown at a moment in time there that those moves, which apparently had nothing to do with my professional development, had everything to do with what our special needs son David needed at the next city that the current city was no longer able to provide services for him. Okay? And God was using my corporate moves, not for me, but to get our son David what he needed in the next stage of his development and care. I mean, it just sort of took your breath away. You're looking at things at one level and God's at work at another level, a higher level. My thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways, said the Lord. And we see this in Scripture. In Luke 1, there's this beautiful example of when pregnant Mary, this probably 13-year-old pregnant girl, walks through the front door of Zachariah and Elizabeth's home. And John the Baptist, in his 6th month probably, leaps in the womb of Elizabeth. And suddenly she gets the answer to her why question, why her barrenness took so long. Because for the vast majority of that 35 years that she was barren and waiting, Mary hadn't even been born yet. Of course she had to wait for Mary to become born and then to become 13 years old. Okay? So there are a number of examples like that. And I've often wondered about David and his 10 years on the run. Did he ever get an answer to his why question from the Lord? I don't know. But I suspect he would have had one. And so I want to take a little deeper look at contextually at that 10-year period when David was on the run from Saul, because I'm convinced that was God's way of getting him an advanced degree in shepherding. All right, let's take a deeper look at that. Now, if you look at the graphic on the screen, here's a graphic you've seen before. Hopefully you're getting used to it, okay? These are the kinds of questions we like to ask to set the stage for digging into a passage from a contextual perspective. Where are we? That's geography. What's happened before? That's history. What are the cultural issues we need to dig into? What are the linguistic and literary issues? And what does the site look like? All right, so let's just do a little bit of that here. In terms of where are we? Well, we're in southern Israel, in Judea. And we've got 2 people groups. We've got the Philistines on the coastal plain, and you see them in purple. And then you've got the Israelites in black here, located on the central ridge. And separating that is a buffer zone called the Shvelah, the gentle, humble hills of Judea. It's one of the most beautiful parts of Israel. And these 2 people groups are separated by geography. And they are very, very different people groups. Some of them are mountain people. That's the Israelites who live in the hill country of Judea. And the Philistines are coastal plain people. They live next to the Mediterranean. They're both grain growers on the flat land that's there, and they're maritime. They're sailors in the eastern Mediterranean basin all the way up to Asia Minor, where the Hittites are. Okay? Now, there's a difference between coastal plain people and valley people. Let me contrast Silicon Valley, everything that's conjured up your mind, high tech, really smart people, rapid technological development, on top of technology. Contrast that with the valleys of Appalachia, which are completely different than Silicon Valley. Both the kinds of people, their awareness, their education, their sophistication level, their technological competencies, completely different. And we have this same phenomena going on in scriptures between mountain people and between coastal plain people. Because we are in the middle iron age when we're in 1st and 2nd Samuel, and yet the Israelites are still in the bronze age. Metallurgical differences. Let's start walking through what's happened before, okay? In 1 Samuel 13, verses 19 to 22, we discover there are no blacksmiths in Israel. And if you'll join me on the screen here, here's the text in its detail. Not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords and spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines to have their plow points, mattocks, axes, and sickles sharpened. The price was 2/3 of a shekel for sharpening plow points and mattocks, and 1/3 of a shekel for sharpening forks and axes and for rejoining goads. So on the day of battle, not a soldier with Saul and Jonathan had I'm going to insert here, carbonized iron, which means steel sword, or spear in hand. All they had was bronze. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had steel swords. Here's a footnote from the Zondervan's TNIV Study Bible. A Philistine monopoly on the technology of iron production placed the Israelites at a great disadvantage in the fashioning and maintenance of agricultural implements and military weapons. All right? Let's say the same thing another way. The superiority, the military superiority of the Philistines over the Israelites was not because they were better fighters. It's because they had better instruments of war. If anyone ever gave you a choice in a sword battle to have a steel sword or a bronze sword, let me give you a piece of advice. Take the steel. Steel is much harder than bronze. The length of the blade can be twice as long. And so you're at a total disadvantage with a bronze sword. It's too short and it's too soft. And that's why the Israelites are up in the hills. Because the domination that the Philistines has over the Israelites is one of metallurgy. And a big chunk of Samuel's here can be explained from a metallurgy perspective. Let's pick up our timeline here. In 1 Samuel 16, David is appointed king by Samuel. And if you were David, what were you thinking within days after Samuel anointed you king? Probably, how long is it going to be before I sit on Saul's throne? It's got to be within a year, maybe just several months. And one thing I've learned in life is the moment you define your expectation, you probably defined your disappointment, because life doesn't turn out like we hoped and dreamed it would. Our ways are often microwave ways. Give it to me 2 minutes on power 10, and God's ways are often slow bake ways. All right? His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. So in 1 Samuel 23, David is now on the run from Saul's court. He's staying in desert strongholds in the Judean wilderness in the northern Negev. In 1 Samuel 24, David and Saul meet at Ein Gedi in that cave encounter that's fairly familiar. And a remarkable thing happens in 1 Samuel 27. David and his 600 mercenaries farm themselves out to be subcontractors for the king of Gath and become Philistine mercenaries. And he did that for 1 year and 4 months. Then in 2 Samuel 2:4, David is publicly anointed king. And in 2 Samuel 5, we have a united country. The Philistines are never ever a threat again, and we have the golden age of David and Solomon. A couple of pictures here. Here's our wilderness of Judea. Not like the wilderness of the Cascades with lots of trees and water and rain. There's almost nothing in this wilderness. Here's a picture of Ein Gedi, the oasis where Saul and David met one day. Here are some pockmarked caves at Ein Gedi to give you a feel as to the fact that there really are caves in this environment here. And here's an aerial shot of Gath, one of the 5 Egyptian city-states. It's on the eastern edge of the Philistine plain, and this is where David hired himself out to the king of Gath to be a mercenary, all right? And now, let's pause for the rest of the story. David is anointed to be king. He moves into Saul's court. It's not exactly an easy experience. After a fairly short period of time, he's on the run from Saul. And after a year on the run, might David have said, okay, I'm ready to be king. Let's do it. But there's a second year, and a third year, and a fourth year, and a fifth year. He's on the run, and on the run, and on the run again, and on the run again. And in the midst of that, he's got 600 mercenaries he's trying to always keep pointed in the same direction. At the height of my modest management career, I had 300 people reporting to me at different layers and levels. And for me, that was the hardest job in the world, to keep 300 people pointed in the same direction with the same purpose, with the same motivation, and the same goals. I can't imagine how hard it is for a 10-year period of time to keep 600 independent-minded, tough mercenaries pointed in the same direction. That's where David learned his under-shepherding skills. That's where he learned his management expertise. That's what prepared him to be king of Israel. God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. So anyway, year 6 and year 7, and he's still on the run, and he's still not king. And for whatever reason, in the 8th year, he hires himself out to the king of Gath. And here's my hunch, okay? When he walked into that stronghold of Gath to meet with the king of Gath, he was able to oversee how in the world the Philistines were able to make carbonized steel. It's a technology that the Hittites in Asia Minor had in 1250 BC. The Philistines are maritime people working up and down the eastern Mediterranean coast. The Hittite Empire eventually goes away, and I want to suggest to you that the residue of the Hittite Empire, their ability to take carbon and drop it into iron ore that's heated up to make steel, got recognized by the Philistines, brought back to the coastal plain, and that's the superiority they hold over Israel. And David saw, is that what they're doing? Aha! And in the 8.5 years prior to that, I'm pretty well convinced he ran across the sources of iron ore. And so you pull those two things together, when David becomes king, there's a couple of battles, and then the Philistines are no more. Why? Because the Israelites now have carbonized steel weaponry, and the inferior position they had on weaponry is gone, and now the golden age of Israel can be manifested. On the run for a reason. Not just to develop under-shepherding advanced skills, but also to prepare a nation for its golden age. Did David ever understand that? I don't think so. Might God have given him a revelation? That's why you were on the run for so long? Maybe. But I'm not so sure. Sometimes God in His grace gives us those glimpses. Sometimes He doesn't. But it doesn't mean that God doesn't know what He's doing. That His timetable is perfect and His plans are perfection. There's some implications to this. If you'll join me on the screen graphic here. Remember this. Nothing is ever lost in God's economy. This is where David learned his leadership skills. This is where he learned the secrets of metallurgy and where to get iron ore. Sometimes God in his grace gives us glimpses into the dots that he's connecting in the rearview mirror of our lives. Sometimes he doesn't, but when he does, rejoice and be grateful. I think there's something else we can take away from this. Relax. God absolutely knows what he's doing. And you know what? In the perfection of his nature, he's never made a mistake. And he's not about to start on your life and mine. And I think by implication here too, there's another insight. Beware of rigid expectations of what you think God has to do when. His ways are not our ways. His timetable is not our timetable. His thoughts are not our thoughts. But he always knows what he's doing. What we do need to cultivate is a sense of expectancy, not rigid expectations. As Paul said, a sense of expectancy that he can do far more abundantly than anything I might ever ask, think, or imagine. I really like the word imagine in some of the translations, right? Some of you out there have phenomenal imaginations. God's way beyond that in what he thinks, in what he conceives. And once again, as we look at coastal plain people and hill country people, geography matters. When we look at iron ore and its distribution in Israel, particularly in the southern part of the country and the Negev, and we look at iron ore and secrets of metallurgy, it all adds up, okay? Because context always matters. David on the run, a fascinating story. One I think that has some really rib-sticking implications for each one of us as we continue down this journey of faith. Thank you.